Hello everyone, I'm Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and money color commentator. On today's show, Tracking Security Markets, part 1 in our series on index investing. I have to say, one of the reasons why people really like indexing is that some people call it the poor person's portfolio. If you bought the S&P Index 500 as an example, you could say, wow, I have 500 large cap companies in here. Major diversification, not in classification, but it's still diversified over 500 companies. Some people may want small caps. You could go to the S&P 600 to catch that. So there's different indices, both foreign and domestic, all around the world that you can tie into and look at that and look at them as barometers. Some people use them for direct investing. Most indexes that we talk about generally don't have management involved. So the management fees are quite less. So people like indexing because it's very cheap or easy entry into the market, and again, has some diversity, not by class so much, but at least you have 500 companies. Hopefully they're not all correlated if the market's going down. And just keep in mind, indexing is a security. You could lose your money. So you got to just be open for the risk tolerance issues. And always, as I always said before, you should take a risk tolerance test, even if we don't think maybe risk tolerance testing is really scientific. It still is an indicator, and it'll give you kind of an idea where to go with and when you're building your financial profile. So it's important to understand what your risk tolerance are. But I like indexing, and I think over the long haul, it's proved itself time and again, low cost, easy entry, and they usually have a tremendous diversified amount of companies involved, so it should really help you out. I think that's the way to go. Some people use it to track the security markets, to say, hey, how is the market doing? I don't know if I want to see every single thing that's out there. There's tens of, I think there's like 15,000 mutual funds. I don't know how many index funds, REITs, there's so much out there. So you want to be able to come to an index sometimes and get a barometer of where the market is. It's only an indicator. It's not where the market is or is going, but it's a good idea. Now, and just a little side point, the S&P Index 500 has a VIX. It's a volatility index. It's got an index on volatility and risk. And you can see that every day. And most of the big financial channels track the big three, the NASDAQ, the S&P 500, and of course the Dow Jones. But they also track this VIX, this volatility index on the S&P Index 500. So if you're ever trying to get an idea where the market's going, kind of a flavor of the attitude and where the actual market could be possibly going, again, remember this is all potential, possible, you can kind of use the VIX as kind of a small barometer. All these things together will help you kind of start to get into it. But in tracking the market, we got to follow some rules. If I'm an index, I have a methodology about myself. So when I'm looking at certain things for methodology's sake, I want to make sure that I'm obeying the methodology and the approach that I said I was going to take. Every index has a methodology. It has its own approach. It has its own set of rules, which states that it states the index objective and the market that it'll track, the criteria that it'll use to determine whether the security is eligible for inclusion in the index. So you want to keep in mind all the time, what was the methodology? Listen, if your goals, if you actually know your financial goals and you know what you're looking at as far as methodology, you may want to start matching up your criteria with their criteria. That could help you say, listen, I'm aligned with their same goals. If I'm an investor, I'm wondering if the index fund is aligned with my goals. You want to be able to look at that. Methodology, in fact, governs every facet of an index creation. So operations, its underlying reliability, its credibility. Methodology is also the reason that two index tracking, which is important to me, look at the same markets, because then you can kind of get an idea. If I have two indexes tracking the same market, I can get a pretty good idea of what the market may be, but check it out. They could still have two different results. So it's really imperative to understand that some of these contracts, or I'm sorry, indexes, have really broad appeal. They're tracking hundreds, sometimes thousands of individual indices that have all these different securities inside. That's a broad brush. Some have very narrow, very few, and of course in between everybody else. So you want to look at tracking performance. And people, you can go on your iPhone, as I do, and I can go out there, and right now I have Dow Jones on there, I have the NASDAQ, I have certain individuals like Apple, and I have other ones on there like Google, but I always have the S&P 500, and I can look at that in the morning. I look at some of the pre-market activity kind of see what happened in Europe, in Asia, see how it's going to affect us, if it is going to affect us at all. And I want to start tracking that. So I can put that on my phone and I can look at that every day. Now, depending upon where you are in the time zone, everything is really in our country from a financial point of view is pretty much run off the East Coast. We're out on the West Coast right now, and in Arizona, half the year we're on the Pacific time, the other half of the year we're on Mountain time. We don't change, just the country changes around us. So when we're looking at it today, as I'm recording this, the market's 3 hours ahead of time. So at 6:30 my time, we're happening. We're waking up to the market. We know what's going on. It's a good indicator of what's going to happen, and it gives us kind of a barometer. Should we be in this? Is it an index appeal to you? Does it appeal to you? So you want to look at some of these ideas of tracking the performance using that. Now, just as an idea, some people use indexes just as a benchmark. Hey, did I beat the index? Did I beat what I was aiming for? And to look at portfolio performance. And remember, everything we're talking about today is basic entry level into indexing, because we want to look at it in almost every way we can. As benchmarks for evaluating the performance of a specific investment, it's great because let's say I have my own portfolio, or I have my own registered investment advisor who's actually created a portfolio for me, hopefully based on my risk tolerance and my timeline, when I'm going to need the money, and the goals that I have set for that portfolio. So I want to look at it as a benchmark. Hey, is my benchmark of my portfolio, is it beating or is it actually losing to the S&P 500? If that happens too often, remember, not that many people's portfolios beat the indices like an S&P 500 index. So you want to look at that and make sure, hey, how am I doing? And some people use that as a benchmark. It's used as a gauge. Am I performing? Do I have good success? And then as the basis of an index products, it could be mutual funds, it could be exchange traded funds, it could be option contracts, it could be future contracts. You could even buy indexes on annuities. You could buy it on index universal life. You could buy it on variable universal life. There's so many platforms, also carry with them different tax platforms and also different dividend performance. Some of them, like I'm thinking the annuity, the universal life, and the variable life, those three indexings do not participate for the end user or the owner for dividends. So when you have an index and you're saying, well, I don't like that, so you want to stay in the pure indexing on a mutual fund or an index platform, that's okay. Just remember, on the annuity, I'm getting tax deferral. On the life insurance, I'm getting tax deferral. And maybe, depending upon if it's a TAMR compliant contract, you might be getting withdrawals, and free policy loans as long as the contract's kept in force for the life of the policy insured. So there's a lot of ways to approach indexing, and they all have their favoritism issues. You have to figure out what is the goal here and then match up the product line to it. And by the way, a little side note, just as a kind of a thought, the insurance carriers have gotten into the whole issue of indexing many years ago, especially when we had depressed interest rates. And they're using this quite artfully now. Think about it. There are a lot of people, if you really can design a contract, you could have tax-free index investing. It doesn't include dividends, but some people say the trade-off against taxes is a pretty good deal. So you just need to look at that and make sure, does that fit your idea? Here's some example, just an example. And look at this this is the market meltdown of the Dow Jones from July 2007 to March 2009. Now, as you can see, when we started in July, and remember, I understand the cyclical cycles of corrections, of bear markets, but it's very hard to track and trying to estimate or predict a black swan event, which this is. So when you're looking at it, you have to remember, you're going to have some events in your life. One of my big first ones as a young man was in the market debacle in October of 87 or 88, whatever which one it was. And that was our first real, 600-point loss in the market. And that was a chunk of change back in the day. And then we had 2001, 2, and 3, 3 straight years where even the S&P was taking double-digit hits, compounded. So when you're looking at a black swan event, you know, so I get corrections, I get a bear market, but this is a black swan event. And so when you look at this, the market meltdown, you want to say, wow, that happened and it could happen again. So you have to brace yourself, understand your timeline, and figure out, is that where I want to go? I think indexing spreads a little bit more of your risk. I think it's a little bit better shot at it, but it doesn't keep you from experiencing corrections, going through a bear market, or in this case, a black swan event. You want to try to think about indexing. You're spreading, remember, sometimes the class is the same, so you're not really getting diversification. You're not really getting eggs. You're in one sector, and it's large cap in the S&P 500 index as an example. You want to be able to sit there and think about what works for you, and I highly recommend that. If you're going to get into this, you need a registered investment advisor or a registered rep that sells securities that has at least 5 years experience or more, and have been around, seen what's happened, and knows how to help their clients not only handhold through these dark times, but also position them so they can try their best to mitigate corrections, bear markets, and in this case, a black swan event. Don't forget to watch our next segment on constructing and decoding indexes, part 2 of our series on index investing. And keep in mind, before moving forward with any of the ideas on our show, always check with your tax consultant, legal counsel, and financial advisor. You've been watching Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game.